Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Brandon DeCruz, myself, Jeff Black, another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today is episode 31, The Science of Sleep, how sleep impacts muscle growth, fat loss, body composition, training, metabolic health, and hunger. But first, dude, you ready for the PEC 7? Tampa?
Man, I'm so excited. Did
January
you see that?
28th,
I literally
29th?
just made
Yeah,
I just
I
made a
saw that.
post.
I saw
So
that.
I am excited to say the least. I've already started working on my presentation, been doing a ton of research on top of already my coursework and stuff. So it's been a lot of studying to say the least. But I am super excited. We have an all-star cast. I'm gonna turn it over to you so you could let everyone know who's gonna be on exactly. However, I'm super excited to be a part of it again. This will be my fourth or fifth time attending the PSC, my second time presenting. And so I'm really looking forward to not only being able to present with the all-star lineup that we have, the practitioners, the evidence-based practitioners, the researchers, the fellow coaches that I have an immense amount of respect for, but we also have like this little like crew that we go to these conferences with and that we hang out with and we interact with year round. And this really is like the paramount event where we all get to see each other in person. Like Jeff, these are some of the highlights of my year. I get to see you. Last time I had the pleasure of staying with you, which was absolutely awesome because it was in your hometown, obviously put on by your gym. But dude, I'm looking forward to it. I already got my Airbnb in Tampa, just locked it in this weekend. So I will be 7 minutes away from the venue. I'm not going to do the host hotel because I need a kitchen. And so I will be out in an Airbnb. However, I got my flights. My girlfriend and I have our flights. We have our Airbnb. We have everything ready to go. So I cannot wait. But listen, I'm going to turn it over to you just so you tell everyone who's going to be there, who's going to be presenting, and so I don't miss any details.
All right, man. So I can't remember all the topics off my head because I don't have a flyer. So those of you who are interested, the tickets are $525 and they are at www.theexcellencecartel.com. And the reason it is $525 is because the hotels now charge an exorbitant amount of money for where no one traveled during COVID. Like the coaches know the number that we have to beat. So that was the number we came at to be able to make it where everybody could fly and still get their hotels and kind of make it worth doing. But we have Alan
We're not getting
Aragon.
rich off of this one, though.
Yeah, no. We have Alan. Dude, I do it for the connection. Like I'm driving down. So they wanted $3,000 for the projector and the projector screen rental for 2 days. So I am driving down with a projector and projector screen. So yeah, I'm taking one for the team on that, a nice 14-hour drive. But we got Alan Aragon, we got Dr. Scott Stevenson, we got Vince Pitstick, we have Brandon, we have Jason Theobald, Austin Stout, Jeffrey Sue. We have two surprise guest speakers that we are giving a platform to that we have recognized as two coaches who are up and coming in the space, and we're going to give them a shot to present on the ticket. I am not presenting. Aaron Crawford is presenting on my behalf from Relentless Forever. And I don't think I'm missing anyone. Am I? Oh, Lauren Conlin.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna read out the topics because I actually just posted about this. So my man Jeffrey Sue will be posting about the pathophysiology of PCOS and insulin resistance. Aaron Crawford, who is a fellow coach with Jeff at his company, is going to be going over natural fertility optimization. I will be going over optimizing insulin sensitivity and blood glucose management for improving body composition and health outcomes. Lauren Conlin will be going over turning pro, what it takes to get professional recognition in our industry. Austin Stout will be doing a deep dive on methylation and the genetic on-off switch. Vince Pitstick will be doing accelerating outcomes, coaching the underlying conditions. My man, Dr. Scott Stevenson, will be doing unraveling the muscle growth mystery, rep sets, volume, and frequency. Jason Theobald will be reviewing contest prep roadmap. And then to close it all out, one of my mentors, someone that's been on the show, someone I have immense respect for, Alan Aragon is going to be doing nutrition for muscle gain and fat loss, research versus the real world.
Dude, thank you for reading that. You know who I'm most excited? Me and Lauren were talking, and I helped her come up with the angle to go about, but like that turning pro, like what it takes to actually be a published, research, respected, so forth. Like, I think it's going to be a great one because Lauren has so much diversity in that topic. I thought it'd be great to talk to a lot of coaches.
So yesterday when you emailed that out and we saw the actual official flyer like that we were going to release, publicly.
Yeah.
And I saw Lauren's, the first thing I thought of was you and Stephen Pressfield, because obviously that's the title of one of his most prominent books. And I thought that's definitely something. She was in Nashville. They were talking about topics and stuff. And you probably suggested that, or maybe she read that, or just the influence
I suggested, yeah, we chatted with it. I figured she could pull it off if anyone could pull it off.
Hell yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
why I went with her to have that discussion with, because I mean, like we have all the high level nuance, but you got to have a good mix, right? If it's all like crossing your eyes with like, all right, my client has 8 cats and all sleeps in the same bed and then they don't eat. And then all this weird, like nuanced shit that like one client in your whole 20 years is ever going to have, that just drowns it down for everybody else. So we're trying to make it a really balanced ticket. If I had it my way,
Absolutely.
I'd have more business on it, but people seem to want to know the weird stuff. So that's the one we're rolling with for this. But the excellencecartel.com, 525 is the ticket cost. I'd go ahead and lock everything in now. And we are telling everybody up front, because we have a upfront number, there is no refunds. So if you feel like that you can't make it, then we just suggest don't buy it. But you will miss out on a great event if you can't make it, because it's gonna be awesome as hell.
Yeah, and I would definitely suggest, just from the standpoint, if anyone is really leaning towards going, jump on it. I just made a post less than an hour ago, and I had 4 clients reach out to me already that they are planning on going. So
Sweet.
these will go by quickly, especially because it's January in Tampa, and we
Yep.
got a great turnout for last year in Dallas, which is where I presented at. It was actually the same weekend, exactly a year, prior. Obviously, it was 2021 rather, or 2022 rather than 2023. And so a lot of people will jump on this and get right on it. And unfortunately, with how hotel situations are, once we hit 50, we're probably going to be capped. So definitely
Yeah.
jump on it, get ahead of things, and come out to a great event and come meet us. We'd
Awesome.
love to meet you.
Dude, well, how's your last 7 days been now that we got that out of the way?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, dude, honestly, it's been a super busy week on my end. It's funny. I often speak with like other individuals, whether it be my clients or other coaches, and when they tell me that they've had a really busy week, they almost say it like it's a bad thing, like because they focus on all the stress and the pressure they've been under due to how busy they've been. But I have to say, I genuinely think that being busy is a blessing, and I love the feeling of being both busy but also being incredibly productive and crushing a week where I've had a ton of tasks to tick off. I'm that type that when I have a to-do list, it like gives me that little dopamine hit every time I cross something off that list. So on the coaching front, I've had a few new client signups. And I have a few schedules for this week, so the things are going well there. Then, in terms of my coursework, I got really lucky in terms of my lineup, because I'm very busy in a business perspective. But then, from the coursework perspective, we're diving into the next 2 weeks is going to be nutritional biochemistry and metabolism. And so these are two areas that are like wheelhouses, like they're in my wheelhouse. So it's just a refresher of the information so far. So I had my first lecture on nutritional biochemistry last night, and it's just a refresher on information rather than me learning new things from scratch, which aligns perfectly with this week because I am really busy. So I'm not going to have to spend as much time outside of my classwork, like diving into reviewing different additional texts and things of that sort. But also, besides that, I've had a really big week. We were just speaking off air about the trajectory of our podcast, but also other podcasts. And I was, within the last week, I've been a guest on numerous podcasts, and there were different ones. So they were podcasts I've never been on before, and so I was a brand new guest, and so I got to speak with, two of them were internationally based podcasts, which was nice because, you know, honestly, a lot of times I speak on very similar podcasts. It's within the same network. It's people that we know that they're fans of the show, or they're within the network of the PEC or whatever it may be. But it's always nice when I get to speak on a different platform, especially an international one, where it allows me to reach like a different audience and demographic. And I had a really interesting conversation. I wanted to kind of pose it your way, just get your thoughts on it. Because
Sure.
this is something that I get a lot of questions about from my mentees, from other coaches, from listeners of the show. And so I was engaged in this conversation on the podcast that I did last week. And the host asked me if I ever felt like I made a mistake by not choosing a niche within my coaching and targeting a specific client avatar. And I think I felt that way, honestly, like within the beginning of like early on in my coaching career. But I'm at the point that, I'm about to celebrate 10 years of online coaching in January. And I kind of at this point have realized that having worked with such a diverse array of clients over the years has probably been like one of my biggest advantages, as it's allowed me to not only gain experience working with clients of every background, goal, lifestyle, everything you can imagine, like disease state, whatever you want to say, but it's also spurred me to look into areas far beyond just like nutrition and training as a coach. And it's really like forced me to become a well-rounded practitioner who has like a massive toolkit essentially. So I have all these principles that I don't have any protocols. I don't have any of these set forget principles, programs that I utilize with everyone, because everyone's so different that I work with. So it's allowed me to just have all these principles, all these tools to work with, and all this knowledge, where then I'm able to use the specific tool that's fit for the specific client to get the best results within the constraints of their lifestyle. And the advantage of that becomes more and more evident the longer that I do this. Like, for an example, like this past week, I onboarded 2 new clients this weekend. And one of them was, a female lifestyle client. She's a nurse. She's in her 50s. She just went through menopause. And so, I'm working on her programming. And then the very next day, I signed an IFBB pro figure competitor who just competed at the Texas Pro on Saturday. So it's like, these are two females, completely different sectors of demographic, 2 completely different backgrounds, but it keeps like my job very interesting and engaging. And I often get that question from mentees of mine, fellow coaches, like, do you think I should niche down? And like, in my opinion, that just hasn't been the direction that I've went into, except for the very early initial stages of my career where I really did focus on contest prep competitors. But in my opinion, and I'm also kind of biased because I've had such a great experience working with such a wide array of clientele. But I wanted to, pose it to you. Like, I got that question on the podcast and I said, I don't think it's a mistake. And I'll tell you reasons why. But I also wanted, I respect your opinion and wanted to hear maybe some feedback from you. Like, do you think that early coaches or newer coaches should niche down, should find a target, demographic, or create a client avatar, like a lot of these business coaching, programs, really incentivize you to do or push you to do? What's your opinion?
So, oh man, I always ruffle everyone's feathers when I talk on business. If I was beginning, no, I wouldn't niche down at all. Fuck that noise. You go out there and help as many people as you can who need help. Like, that's what makes you a good coach, is being dynamic, not pigeonholing yourself into, I'm a coach who helps women restore their life and not eat bad food while finding their pure bliss and happiness.
Insert into IG bio.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the deal though. It's based on a book that these marketers took called Red Ocean, Blue Ocean. And it's all based upon like, everybody's out there in a red ocean. I'm like, yeah, but our red ocean's full of a bunch of shitty coaches. So like, that's like, to me, still a blue fucking ocean. Like, so I don't look at it like that. I look at it like, go eat. And here's the deal. I said this during the new ethics thing. I said it all the time. I say it to my coaches. Stop looking on Instagram to get your fucking business to grow. Like, go talk to people in the grocery store. Go talk to people in your cat community. You'd be surprised how many people live like next door. Like, I have one guy who lives next door to me, literally could go to my gym. He just wants to do online training. Okay, cool. You know what I mean? Like, why not? But I would never have had that had I not had a conversation at the pool over the summer. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I think niching down, if you've been in it for 25, 30 years and you're like got a wait list of 250 people or some ungodly thing that you just want to be by yourself, and there's all these things. But even then, I would raise my rates before I niche down. So that's my answer.
No, I appreciate that. So really what I told him was I spoke about it from my own perspective, but then I also gave him more of a broad-based perspective based on my engagement with other coaches, because I've worked with coaches that aren't niche down, then I've worked with very successful coaches that I mentor. However, they've kind of niched themselves down, and then they get these cases where they don't have any experience. They've been coaching 8-10 years, but they have no experience with certain client cases. And either they have an interest in learning, or they took someone on instead of deferring them out to someone else and realizing it was out of their scope of practice and experience. And now they've hit stopgaps in the system. They've hit a bottleneck because they don't have the experience, they don't have the knowledge, and they never had the interest previously to learn past what their area of specialty was. So they were just specific on one type of thing, just restoring hormones. They were a hormone specialist, they were a gut health specialist, or all these things. And they don't have a wide array or wide enough of a toolbox to really be able to help the masses. And that's really what I look at it. And so I told this individual, he was a younger coach, and I said, listen, off air, I said this privately to him, but I'll share this with the show and with yourself. I said, this is what I want to ask you. Do you want to be a programmer, or do you want to be a coach and a practitioner? And that's really what you need to ask yourself. Because if you want to be a programmer, I will tell you 100 times over 100. I've worked with many prominent coaches. I've mentored them. Their systems are much more efficient than mine because they work with the same type of person. So they have templated programs. It's very little deviations that they have to make client to client. And there's very little originality. And really, it really systematizes everything because all their check-ins look very similar. They're clients with a very similar background, with similar goals, with similar lifestyle constraints. And so there's very few and far between things where they really have to go into customized programming. That's what I consider a programmer. A coach and practitioner is someone that is able to best fit a system for the client, the specific individual client sitting in front of you. And you're considering all their individual characteristics, their needs, their abilities, their preferences. And that's really what coaching is about. If you were to take and coach on a large scale perspective, and we really look at coaching from, say, an athletic perspective, which is really where coaching comes from, or even evidence-based medicine, you are working with a wide variety of clientele of people that you're helping. And so you need to be able to not only cater your knowledge and your approach to that person, but you also have to cater your approach psychologically, how you address these people, how you communicate. You have to be almost like a chameleon, where you could change the way that you approach all these different situations and these different clients based on their both physiological and psychological needs, wants, and preferences. And so if you want to do that, yes, it's going to be more challenging, but I'll tell you, 10 out of 10 times, you will be a more well-rounded practitioner in the long run, and you'll be able to both help more people, but also be a lot more confident in your area of specialty, because it will be you'll be able to go wide and go deep rather than just going deep on one, subject.
I agree with you. Sorry, I had a cough real quick. Allergies, but I think here's the thing. Everyone will be like, I'm not a cookie cutter coach. And I'm like, but if you train 100 people from the ball, you would kind of have to be to some degree, because those are the people. It depends upon who your clients are, right? It might be cookie cutter for some. I think it's finding a system that works for you and that you could get the best results and have the best communication with your clients. And I think communication above all is what coaches should be striving for. And until you perfect the system where everything is crystal clear with your clients, you're still lacking as a business owner. So I'd clarify that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree.
Cool. Well, dude, my last 7 days, like I told you off there, because we were talking about doing a second podcast week, but I have to put it on hold for quarter 1. The gym so in June of 2020, we were at 522 memberships, and we're on pace by the end of December. So 18 months to be at 1,064 memberships. So literally 100% growth in 18 months, staggering numbers. I'm actually creating a new position for Relentless and for Iron House. It'll be dual function. So that will be kind of cool. I don't know how it's going to look. I don't know if I'm going to do it soon or not, but I'm at least looking at some stuff. And then I went to Arete with Andy Frisella and Milet and Robert Allen. So I was let down. I'm going to tell you guys this, and this is, if you're a business owner, attitude is the new high performance offense. Okay. And I listened to questions being asked to 2 men who are making 9 figures a year. What do you do on the hard days? What do you do on the days that it's just tough? Here's the deal. You get the fuck up and do what the fuck you need to do because you want to win more than the other guy. And like, I've decided that's what I'm going to write, like my next book on. The psychology of why people are pussies is what I think it is. And but it let me know when I'm listening to shit, Brandon, people have absolutely the dog shit whipped out of them now. Like, I am just seeing more and more people, they're just coming up and they're just like, well, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it's like, the best practice I came away with in that whole thing is I'm going to go fuck up a lot of shit. And I'm going to figure it out on my own, because no one wants to tell you stuff because they want you to join their masterminds, or they want you to join this high level group, or they want you to do this other secret sauce. But overall, I was not really impressed. Robert Greene stole the show, and Robert Greene's whole point was, with your proper attitude, you can crush AIM.
Now, let me ask you,
Sure.
I want you to critically think about this, because I have had multiple friends, very successful business owners, that have invested into the membership of Arete, which I believe you went to a seminar. You're not in their actual program, correct?
I was in the program at one point, did it and didn't enjoy it. And I think after my year, I left.
Okay. All right. So, obviously everyone's going to have their own experience. It's just like with people. We have relationships with people, and we have mutual friends, and we have completely different relationships with them. But I do want to know, from the perspective, were you disappointed with the presenters and the information that they gave, or with the people that surrounded you? I'm talking in terms of who was attracted to the event, because how you described it was the questions that they were giving was more so that they were there for a motivational speech from Tony Robbins than a business building actual presentation and seminar, where they could have asked more insightful questions where everyone else could have benefited.
I think the questions are more related to, I think probably some people would have benefited. So here's what I think. I think in events like that, someone like me, I want to know from them why I want to pay the extra money to be in their private groups. Like, why would I want to know that? And I didn't walk away with any of that. So here's the deal. I'm going to give you guys the hack. The whole thing was NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So if you can sit there and reprogram the movie that your mind sees, you could do some damning things. That's how Tony Robbins gets people to walk on fire within 10 minutes.
I've been to it.
Really, yeah. It's just, so it was a little bit of that. They say that you leave with tactical information. I didn't leave with anything tactical at all. And Lauren, who was there, had a completely different experience than I did.
Did she enjoy it?
She enjoyed it, but she felt she was at that point she would. But here's the deal, man. Like, you got to think, like, you know me, Brandon. Like, you know how aggressive I am when it comes to
That's why I'm asking these questions.
So for
realize
me,
all of our experiences are based on our vantage point. They're based on our perspective and based on our background. So for you and I to go somewhere, we're expecting that it's going to be next level and that it's going to unlock something that maybe you or I couldn't do on our own. But a lot of people, they're dependent on the motivation and on the inspiring words of others. And they need that in the moment type of thing, where you and I have spoken about this many times in the past. We don't give a fuck about motivation. That does not drive us. We could be incredibly unmotivated, but we're disciplined and we're focused on certain goals, both intrinsic and extrinsic. And we're going to drive towards that, whether, you know, our dick's in the dirt or whether we feel great or don't feel great. We're going to get up and go to work regardless.
Here's my whole thing I have, and then we got to get into the topic or we'll just run out of all the time in the world. My thing is this. I feel like when you get into business, there's inherent, like, you're going to have more days you get your teeth kicked in than not. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
it's a humbling experience.
And I feel like that people get into it because they're told, like, oh, find what you love to do every day and you'll never work a day in life. Like, I've created the life I don't have to run away from. I'm completely fucking debt free, with the exception of my house. My companies are debt free. I could drag my dick around and be like, yeah, I have this and I have that. I don't do that, but I'm really in a nice, quaint little spot in my life. And it's still not enough because I enjoy creating, right? And there's this idea to me, like, how much impact can I create in my community is where I'm going with. And I feel like that's the lie sold. And these people don't know what to do when they get their teeth kicked in, and then they just like run and cover. And I'm like, look, business is brutal. There's only a reason that 2% of entrepreneurs make it. And that is the facts. And if you're going to get into the ring and do business, understand that there's people like me sitting in there. I'm just fucking, it's like, I'm a gray white looking for chum in the water, man.
Business is a contact sport, and a lot of people don't realize that. And this is the other reason I've been to various Tony Robbins seminars, including incredibly some of his most expensive packages, which I will not say was a good investment. However, I will say that I believe that a lot of people that go there, it's not with the right intention, or it's under misguided principles.
Great.
And their reason for being there is because they're looking for something different, and they're there because they can pay to play. They're not at the standard, and I'm not trying to compare myself versus them or you versus them. Nothing of this comparison game. What I'm trying to get across to you is they're not even in the arena yet.
I agree.
You know what I mean? They're not even in the arena yet. They're able to pay for entrance. And so they didn't earn their way into there. They didn't get to a situation where they've had their back against the wall and really had to grind for every single thing they have and had to build a business from scratch. They've gotten maybe a lucky break, or, you know, I interact with people. I'll talk to anyone at these events. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I inherited, you know, my father's business and I want to take it to the next level. But they don't have the skills, having had to overcome struggles of not having money, of having financial situations where they thought they were going to lose their business. And when you've had your back against the wall, and we've had many private conversations, we're going to succeed in this industry because we're going to chase ever forward progression, regardless of how well we do. We could be at the top one day and it's still not going to be enough. And it's because we have an intrinsic driver, whereas other people, they have extrinsic things. They get to their goal. In your case, say, for instance, someone else of a different mentality, they got their dream car. It might have been enough. It's not enough for you, because it's not about that physical manifestation of your goal. It's the fact you checked off a bucket list and now you've made another one. It's the chase that you're looking for. It's not the actual physical manifestation of that.
Exactly. And, you know, here's like my summary to it. If you take 100 people and put us in a room, entrepreneurs, 2 of us are going to make it really well. The other 18 are going to kind of be okay, and the other 80 are going to die. And here's the one thing I could tell you about the 80 people who will die. It's 2 words: imposter syndrome. If you can control the emotion of that voice and you can understand the utility of patience, you can be a deadly fucking weapon. And I'll just leave it there. So with that being said, man, you know what we should do for a podcast someday? We should get, guys, ladies, if you're listening, hit us with some business questions, some stuff that you guys are unsure of, because Brandon and I get these a lot. We could gladly do an episode where we just talk about business stuff for an hour and give you our thoughts. You know, that might break up some of the research stuff, because I know you guys have been mentioning to us you'd like when we talk more about like behind the scenes stuff like we're doing. Like, I'll tell you, I'm keeping my mustache for a year, Brandon. Every single person that looks at me with it, I smile at them. I'm like, it's the stash, isn't it? 84 men kill themselves a week. 75% of suicides are male. And I get to have a conversation with them and open their eyes. and I'm going to keep doing it.
Conversation
So,
opener. Good
yep,
stuff,
yep,
man.
absolutely. All right. So today's episode 31, the science of sleep. So today we're going to talk about why and how sleep impacts your muscle growth, your fat loss, everything, your training, your mood.
Every single thing you can imagine.
Yeah. I mean, the nights I sleep, I'm not a fun person to be around the next day. So, what is sleep and why is it important, B?
Okay, so just a little caveat to this. I am going to make this is going to be my end statement on sleep. This is going to be the first, I've done podcasts. Obviously, we've discussed some of the drawbacks, the consequences of sleep deprivation on the show before. However, this is for all my clients because this is a common, conversation that I have. And I'm going to send this to every single one of you guys because I really want you guys to realize the implications of not sleeping enough, because it is something that we commonly overlook and it's almost thought of as like an afterthought. It's like put on the back burner. It's something that's almost looked at as non-essential when it is one of the only essential things that we have. So when we look at sleep, it's really a physiological process where our body recovers both physically and mentally for the following day's functions. And sleep is an essential process, meaning our bodies cannot go without it for long periods of time without suffering effects to both our physiology and our psychology. And it's important for a multitude of reasons, including the fact that it's a time when we reach our highest state of parasympathetic nervous system activation. So sleep is a time when we provide our bodies with the highest amount and quality of uninterrupted rest, which helps us restore, repair, and recover. And being in a parasympathetic state for a prolonged period of time helps us to balance out our autonomic nervous system, which is going to help us manage stress. And it greatly aids in tissue repair so that we can adequately recover from the demands of both our training and our day-to-day responsibilities. Like anything that we have to go through, it requires recovery, both from a physical perspective, but also from a mental perspective. Sleep is also both essential and it's important for our hormonal health, as it's a time where we produce hormones. So during sleep is when we see increases in things like testosterone, growth hormone, and IGF-1 production, which are all anabolic hormones involved in helping us improve our body composition. And sleep is also a period in which stress hormones like cortisol, are lowered due to the release of melatonin, which is counter-regulatory to cortisol. So when melatonin's high, cortisol is low. But in the inverse, when cortisol is high, the reason that it impairs, there's many reasons why it impairs sleep quality. But when we have stress hormones that are high, our body can't properly produce and secrete melatonin. So it does interrupt our ability to get sleep as well as stay to sleep. Sleep is also imperative for our cognitive function and our brain health. Because when we get adequate sleep, we're able to better consolidate memories and information, which leads us to being better at learning, both in terms of like the information we learn, but also physical skills. So even like your motor skills in terms of like how you execute a movement, your technical efficiency on different exercises or movement patterns is going to be better when you sleep more. And then immunity. And so lastly, sleep is important for our immunity and keeps us healthy, as getting proper sleep helps us maintain a healthy immune system.
Okay, what are then the effects of sleep loss and sleep deprivation? Since we just listed, like we have insulin resistance, we have bad mood Mondays, we've got all sorts of things we can throw out there.
Yep.
But what are some of the effects of sleep loss and sleep deprivation to like put the pendulum a little bit further on that side?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sleep is one of the few things besides food and water that are essentials for life, health, and our survival. Yet it's often one of the most overlooked components of one's day. And what a lot of people, neglect, they know that sleep's important, but here's the thing. They don't realize that it literally impacts and influences every aspect of our lives, including our physical and mental health, our body composition, and what our physique looks like, our rest and recovery capacity, our training performance, or even our mental performance, our cognition, our mood. So when we neglect getting proper sleep, we can experience negative effects in all of these areas and more. And despite the importance of sleep and all the benefits it provides, the majority of us spend our lives in a sleep deprived state. Like if you were to speak to a person, I looked at, sleep statistics earlier this week, and it showed that 63% of Americans as of 2020 were sleep deprived. And so they were, essentially going through life in this sleep deprived state. They were in a suboptimal level of recovery and repair. And what a lot of people don't realize is the many impacts that poor sleep can have on all aspects of their lives. So today we're going to cover how sleep loss impacts our body composition outcomes in terms of our ability to gain muscle, lose fat, and maintain a lean, healthy physique, how it impacts our hunger hormones and satiety hormones, our calorie intake, our nutritional choices, and our ability to adhere to a diet, our hormonal health, our training performance and recovery, and our metabolic health.
All right, since you've mentioned out those, let's dive into topic one. How does sleep loss, or I guess the subtopic of this, how does sleep loss impact body composition? So when we talk body composition, we're talking about, obviously your fat mass versus your muscle, mass and things like that. So people are very clear what we're talking about on body mass
No,
or body
absolutely. So
composition. Sorry.
sleep loss can negatively impact our body composition through a variety of ways, including how well we're able to stick to, execute, and respond to what we're doing with both our training and our nutrition. So poor sleep habits have been linked to both the gain of body fat and rates of obesity in much of the literature. So a 2011 review looked at the evidence linking decreased sleep duration and poor sleep quality to obesity, and they focused upon studies in adults and found that sleep is an important modulator of endocrine function, so hormonal function, and glucose metabolism, and sleep loss has been shown to result in metabolic and endocrine alterations, including decreased glucose tolerance. So your ability to handle carbohydrates is lessened. Decreased insulin sensitivity. So we see that there's higher levels of circulating insulin needed just to facilitate your transports of the glucose that you take in from carbohydrates. They saw increased evening concentrations of cortisol, which impairs sleep quality all the more, increased levels of the hunger hormone ghrelin, decreased levels of the satiety hormone leptin, and increased hunger and appetite, which resulted in them concluding that there's an association between sleep loss and individuals having an increased risk of obesity. So chronic sleep loss can lead us to being more predisposed to having higher levels of body fat due to the numerous ways that sleep loss impacts our physiology. And not only does poor sleep influence our risk for gaining body fat, but a lack of adequate sleep, which is generally defined as less than 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, can impact our ability to lose fat even when we're dieting. So you could be in an energy deficit, and you could be actively dieting with the goal of losing fat and getting leaner. However, we see in the research that when you're sleep deprived, your ability to actually efficiently lose body fat is impaired. So in a 2018 study from the University of South Carolina, they took subjects and divided them into two groups. And one group followed a diet of calorie restriction by itself. So it was just diet on its own. Then the other group had the same calorie restricted diet, but they also had 1 hour of sleep restriction during the week. And so what they were really trying to do was mimic how most people approach their work week, where they get less sleep during the week and they catch up for sleep on the weekends. So when they looked at it, what they did was they had these calorie restricted group plus sleep restriction. They slept 1 hour less during the week, and then they were able to sleep as much as they wanted on weekends. So when we look at the average of how many hours or how many minutes less per week of sleep that this individual or these groups got, in the sleep restricted group, they slept just 169 minutes less than the diet only group. So they got a little less than 3 hours less sleep per night. And in this study, they found the proportion of muscle loss to fat loss was higher in the sleep restricted group. So they lost less fat mass and lost more muscle mass, despite the fact that their sleep was lowered by just less than 3 hours per week. They also found that those who slept more, so in the other group where it was just calorie deficit by itself, it was just a diet group, they were allowed to sleep adequately, they had higher levels of ghrelin or higher levels of leptin, which impacts their energy expenditure, thyroid production, and many other factors involved in the fat loss process. So they had more efficient outcomes in terms of they had the same calorie deficit, but they responded much greater from both a fat loss and body composition perspective, but also from a hormonal perspective. And then in another study conducted in 2010, researchers split participants into two groups. One group slept 8.5 hours per night, and the other group slept 5.5 hours per night. And both groups were put in the same calorie deficit and lost the same exact amount of weight. But the group sleeping 5.5 hours per night lost 55% less fat mass and 60% more muscle as compared to the 8.5-hour sleep group. And both groups had lost 3 kilograms. But listen to this. The group that was sleep restricted lost only 0.6 kilograms from fat, whereas 2.4 of those kilograms came from fat-free mass. So of the weight they lost, the group sleeping only 5.5 hours per night lost 80% of their weight from muscle and only 20% from fat. So this is a drastic difference. Like you could literally change the outcomes of your diet, of your training, just from sleep loss. And so what we have to realize is sleep loss not only impacts our body composition from a body fat percentage, but it also can inhibit our ability to grow muscle as well as maintain the muscle that we do have. So we see that in some of the literature. They're directly looking at body loss or body fat outcomes. But in 2018, researchers conducted a randomized control trial to investigate why sleep curtailment leads to weight gain and losses in lean mass. So they wanted to look at the underlying mechanisms behind why this occurs, because we see it in other translational research where the outcomes show that people are losing or gaining more body, or losing less fat or gaining more fat, or that they're losing more muscle mass. So what they did was they took 15 young men and had them sleep deprived for one night and noted increased levels of muscle protein breakdown in their skeletal muscle tissue, along with increased levels of metabolites that are involved in the promotion of fat storage. And it's also been shown that just a few nights of lowered sleep quality and quantity can lower our rates of muscle protein synthesis, which is the process by which we produce new muscle proteins, which can then be incorporated into skeletal muscle to build more muscle tissue. So these are all things that show, both from a mechanistic perspective and then also from a dietary outcome perspective, we're getting less results when we're sleep deprived.
So I guess then, like, since you just went into all that, we're getting less results because we're sleep deprived. You're talking about the changes in muscle mass versus body fat. I assume then it's safe to say that sleep loss influences hunger, our hunger hormones, like how full we say we are, and our calorie intake. Because I assume if we're sleep deprived, we're going to probably be all screwed up, or we would be more inclined to overeat with already insulin resistance present from the bad sleep, etc.
No, absolutely, my man. I think we can all attest to a night that we've gotten really poor sleep and we've realized like we're either hungrier, we're more cravey, like we're having cravings for things we generally don't have. And especially when you're on a diet, it often compounds the effect that the diet can have, because we're already, experiencing increases in hunger. And one of the reasons sleep loss can have such a profound effect on body composition is not only due to how it impacts the cellular processes that are involved in the process of building muscle and losing body fat, but also because of how crucial it is to managing both our calorie intake and our adherence to an actual diet. So this is due to the impact sleep has on our two main hormones, which influence our energy expenditure, so how many calories you burn, and our energy intake, which are leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is a hormone that is primarily secreted by our fat tissue, which influences our activity levels, how many calories you burn per day, how satiated and full we feel, and then also signals to our brain if we have enough energy or not. So usually when we look at leptin, and we look at the production of leptin, it's mainly impacted the most and significantly lowered when we're in a deficit, because as we lose body fat, our ability to secrete leptin drops. But another way that many people overlook that we're able to dramatically lower our leptin levels is to not sleep enough. So even if you're eating at maintenance, or even say you're in a surplus and you have enough circulating leptin from body fat itself, our leptin levels can plummet just due to lack of sleep, which will cause us to experience heightened levels of hunger and will also increase the hormone ghrelin. So, we know the hunger hormone ghrelin is directly opposing to leptin. So it's going to impact our hunger. It's also known as the meal initiator. And generally, it goes up right before our regular meal times, which is why we experience an increase in hunger prior to eating. So when you don't sleep enough, leptin levels drop and ghrelin levels increase, which makes for a situation where you feel substantially hungrier, you're more susceptible to cravings, and you also have a lower likelihood of being both physically active and expending calories, which could easily cause you to slip off your diet and eat more as well. So really what we're seeing is a situation where you're more likely to eat more and you're more likely to move less. So you're going to get yourself in a situation where you're, unintentionally going into a surplus, or you're negating the calorie deficit that you're actually trying to create. And the impact that short sleep has on our hunger and satiety hormones has been shown in numerous research studies. So this is something that we actually have statistics on. And so in a 2004 study from Stanford University, they found an association between short sleep and reduced leptin levels, increased ghrelin levels, and increased BMI. And they found that short sleep led to a 15.5 lower leptin concentration and a 14.9% increase in ghrelin levels. And then in another controlled trial by the University of Chicago, they put young, healthy men through just 2 days of sleep curtailment, followed by 2 days of sleep extension, and found that when they were in this sleep curtailment condition, it led to an average 18% reduction in leptin, a 28% increase in ghrelin, a 24% increase in hunger, and a 23% increase, especially for calorie-dense foods that were high in carbohydrates. So this just shows like how prominent it is for sleep to impact our hunger hormones. But then we have to realize that sleep loss doesn't just impact our hunger and satiety hormones, but it can also drastically impact our food choices, our eating behaviors, and our hunger and satiety levels. So both partial and chronic sleep deprivation are closely linked to emotional reactivity and poor emotional regulation, which thus impacts our behaviors around food. So research has seen that when you're sleep deprived, you're more likely to engage in emotional eating behaviors and will often not engage in as many healthy eating behaviors. So really what we see is that, say you were on a diet, you are more likely to slip off that diet and go towards, hyperpalatable foods than you are to stick with the whole, satisfying, highly satiating foods that you might be comprising your diet of. So sleep loss increases or reduces our inhibition or our ability to stop ourselves from making bad decisions, which is why we're more likely to not only experience cravings during, when we're sleep restricted, but also we're at a higher likelihood to give into those cravings, even just after a poor night of sleep. And so when we're sleep deprived, we're more likely to reach for higher palatability foods that are more energy dense and can lead to overconsumption of calories and thus weight gain. And when we look across the literature, and all the studies that are done on how insufficient sleep affects calorie intake, we see that when individuals get insufficient sleep, they tend to consume an average of 250 calories more the next day as compared to when they've gotten sufficient sleep. So just in and of itself, one night of poor sleep will lead to an average calorie increase of 250 calories. Now, in one day, 250 calories doesn't sound like a lot, but say this poor sleep, occurs frequently. It goes for a week. Well, that's a half pound gained. Or if it goes on for a month, that's 2 pounds gained. Or, if you're really sleep deprived and you get insufficient sleep for a full year, that's 26 pounds of fat gained just from getting insufficient sleep. And what we also have to realize is that these, the literature looks at, like, say, meta-analyses, and these are the averages of all studies. But, there's other studies that look at shorter timescales or in different populations, and they see that, that's the average. 250 calorie increase per day is an average when someone gets insufficient sleep. However, there's other, studies within the literature that show that short stints of poor sleep can drive up our calorie intake even more. So in a recent 2020 study published in the Food Science Journal, entitled Nutrients, researchers examined the negative impact sleep deprivation and sleep loss can have on our ability to adhere to a diet. And in this study, they took healthy middle-aged females and split them into two groups. And both groups were allowed to sleep their normal amount during the first 2 days of the study because they wanted to monitor how do these individuals eat normally, how do they respond to sufficient sleep. And then what they did was they split them into two groups. And one group continued sleeping their normal amount for the next 5 days, while the other group was in more of a sleep restricted group, and they cut their sleep duration down for those next 5 days. And they found that the individuals in the sleep restricted group increased their calorie intake by an average of 527 calories per day across all 5 days of the studies. And they also saw that they decreased their percentage of protein intake while increasing their fat and carbohydrate intake. So they were more driven to hyperpalatable, energy dense food sources. And these were in females. These were light females. So they increased their calorie intake by more than 25%, which is drastic. So, if this happens, say, during a diet, this type of an increase in and of itself would undo most people's deficits, because especially if you're a female, say your maintenance calories are 2000. If you're going into a 25% deficit, right then and there, that's 500 calories. But you've undone that when you've had insufficient sleep if you're eating 527 calories more. So, this study, as well as many others, show how much of a detriment poor sleep can have on your hunger levels, your dietary choices, and your ability to adhere to a diet. And this is actually one of the reasons why sleep is one of the main biofeedback markers from a subjective perspective that I track with my clients, because honestly, it's something that I've realized with working with so many people over the years. So many people overlook and they don't realize how much of an effect it can have on not only their body composition, but also like their physiology, their psychology, and then their ability to adhere to a diet. So often I'll have a client that will tell me that this week they experience increased cravings, but also I'm looking at some of their other subjective markers. They have high stress, they had really poor sleep. If they have Oura Ring data, they're showing me that their sleep was tanked. And so there's all these things that we can correlate with one another. And that's just how we're able to increase awareness to that client and say, hey, listen, this isn't just out of the blue. I didn't lower your calories this week. There were no nutritional adjustments. So you're on the same amount of calories, you're doing the same training. All the variables were kept the same from last week. So let's look at what are the outliers. This week, you're only focusing on the fact that the biggest difference that you noticed was your increase in cravings. However, you also got insufficient sleep. You also, pulled an all-nighter. you also had high stress. So all these things compound upon itself. So it's not that the deficit became more drastic. It's that the circumstances within your life made the feeling of the deficit a lot more drastic.
So I guess it's safe to say that sleep would impact the hormones. By the way, the cascade would go then further. So you're thinking progesterone, testosterone, estrogen. How would you dare get into that and like help inform someone to understand? Because like, here's the deal, like people are coming to especially gym pop people. So let's put them into perspective. They already come inflamed because they're already kind of like obese, right? And you're seeing a lot of them go right to testosterone replacement therapy before they lose the weight, which could be kind of maybe doing a disservice, right? So what is some stuff if someone's listening who's overweight before they went and got their hormones checked? Because usually before I run client labs, I always try to go 12 to 16 weeks with a client, like, hey, let's get your like sleep in order. Let's get you eating better. Let's get you doing all these other things, because you can clean up so much of that bad blood work and not be like mortified crying after you get on Google and go, oh my God, Jeff, it looks like my kidneys are gone. I'm dead. I'm dead, dead man. And you're like, no, bro, or lady, whatever the case may be. So how does sleep? I always talk to them about the importance of sleep. I'm like, that's the first thing you can do. And it's the best thing you can protect more than like anything else. So how does sleep loss impact one's hormones?
Absolutely. So when we really look at it, we have to realize that in order to optimize anyone's hormones, you have to get all your ducks in a row. And that includes, like, I always think about it as a triangle. To move your body composition and really optimize your health, we have to look at these three pillars, and that is nutrition, training, and lifestyle. And within lifestyle is the two biggest, I say, anchors or, levers that we can pull are sleep and stress management. So today we're focusing on sleep. We can always do a stress management podcast later on, but
I think that'd be a
sleep
helpful
itself,
one we could definitely do and help people out with.
absolutely. No, absolutely. So a lot of times people are only looking at what they're doing in the gym and then what they're doing in the kitchen. And a lot of those people that come to us, they're lifestyle clients, they have excess adiposity, they have extra body fat. They think that's only the focus. So they want to get exogenous testosterone, they want to get exogenous hormone replacement, and they want to dial in their body composition. And yes, you need to improve your nutritional quality. You need to improve your movement. You need to become more active. You need to dial in your training. However, if you're doing all of that, but then getting insufficient sleep, you're doing yourself a disservice in terms of how your body is going to respond to that program and how the results you're going to be able to get, how you're going to be able to maximize and really get to your best version of yourself. So we know that getting adequate sleep is essential when it comes to maintaining hormone health and hormonal balance. And this is especially true when it comes to anabolic hormones, such as hormones like testosterone, growth hormone, and IGF-1, which are both produced and released during sleep. However, if we don't get adequate sleep quality and quantity, we see a downregulation in the production of these hormones. So essentially what sleep loss does is it leads us to a situation where we have lower concentrations of the positive hormones that we want to get released, and then an increase in the catabolic hormones that we don't want to get released. So this leads to a skewing in the ratio of catabolic to anabolic hormones. So a recent study published in the Physiological Reports last year found that even just one night of sleep deprivation led to an average 24% decrease in testosterone production and an 18% decrease in muscle protein synthesis rates in both males and females. So that was the average across both sexes. So when we look at that, one of them could have been more, one of the sexes could have been more susceptible, but we're only looking at averages. And also, on top of that, sleep restriction has been shown to elevate cortisol, both as a result of the sleep loss in and of itself, but also it actually elevates and causes an elevated cortisol response. So when we encounter stress during periods where we're underslept. So this leads to a situation where our anabolic hormones are decreased, so building and maintaining muscle is more difficult, and then catabolic hormones are elevated, so we're more likely to break down muscle, have a lower resilience to stress, and have our recovery impaired. So this is a situation where if you're looking to optimize your hormones, obviously it's not that I'm against the utilization of hormone replacement or any of those things, but if you don't have your lifestyle in place and you haven't dialed in other parameters within your sleep quality, your stress management, your nutrition, your training, stop looking for a quick fix, because actually what we see within the literature, and we also see in practice, that the vast majority of people that go on hormone replacement don't make it longer than 6 months. And why is that?
Damn.
Jeff, do you know why that is?
I assume most people, they just don't like giving themselves shots, from what I hear from my gym pop people, but I could see where they don't see immediate results. They're not Hulk Hogan in 6 months or whatever they expect to be.
Yeah, so the research on this has really shown that one of the number one factors as to why people do not stay on hormone replacement, it's not due to cost, it's not due to inconvenience, because we have pellets, we have gels, we have every delivery mechanism that you could
Right.
utilize if you don't want to use injections. However, the number one reason is because they feel an initial boost in vigor, in energy, in maybe their body composition, their libido, things like that. But it often diminishes quickly. And the reason for that is not that the hormone replacement stopped working, it's because they didn't optimize anything else within their lifestyle. So really what happens is they looked at that as being the thing that was going to move everything. You know what I mean? However, really what happens is you're not able to fully optimize your response to this clinical intervention unless you have everything else dialed in. So if you still have shit sleep, if you're still not dialing in your nutrition, you're not going to see these body composition improvements. Yes, maybe you feel a little bit more energy, but you're not utilizing it. And so they don't see like this really overwhelming effect in terms of a positive effect from hormone replacement. So they realize that it's not I'm trying to think of the word where it's like I'm gonna forget the word, but there's a specific word they use in the literature for testosterone replacement. They look at it as, and it's a specific word, I'm blanking out on it, but nor here nor there.
Well, dude, you're like a dictionary. We excuse you. It's cool.
Yeah, no, I'll get it on the next podcast. But really, what they're looking at it is for as the one solution to all their problems, and
Right.
nothing is going to be that. Nothing is going to be something that's going to replace every single bad habit you do, because you cannot undo. Just like with fat, if you have accumulated excess body fat over 10 years, you can't expect to strip that off in 12 weeks. So just the addition of a hormone, yes, it might improve certain parameters, but if your blood markers are still impaired, if you still are insulin resistant, if you're still over consuming calories, if you're still insufficiently sleeping, all these things are going to have downstream negative consequences, and you're not going to feel as great as you think you should feel. And so you see all these commercials with these guys running around, they're muscular, gray haired, great looking dudes that are on testosterone replacement. But what you don't see is that they're in the gym 5 days a week. They're dialing in their sleep quality. They're making sure their micronutrients are in check. They're eating nutrient dense whole foods. And so they have everything else within their life. So testosterone or hormone replacement, whether you're a male or female, those were additive to already a great program. However, if you just put that in and you think that that's going to be the super soaker that's going to, fix
Super
everything,
soaker.
you came to a bomb fight with a super soaker and you're really unmatched, you're not going to get the response that you're looking for. So a lot of people end up dropping off of testosterone replacement. And honestly, I've spoken to numerous people that have been involved in hormone replacement clinics and say that it's really not that profitable because their retention rate is very low.
I don't disagree. And I think a lot of his people get their feelings hurt and let down quick. And I'm
Absolutely. They
just
have
like,
high
yeah.
expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So then let's talk about how we have two final things we need to talk about. How does sleep loss impact training performance and recovery?
Hold up. This was the word I was looking for. Everyone in the audience, it is panacea. Testosterone is not a panacea, meaning it is not the one solution for all your things. It's not going to be the thing that's going to fix everything. And so the word I was looking for was panacea. Just came to me.
Oh, well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Brandon. We appreciate that. But how does sleep loss impact our training performance and recovery? Other than like, you should feel this. If you don't, I just want to train with you to see how hard you train.
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, let's be real. It's pretty logical how this affects our training performance and recovery, even if you don't think about it, because we've all probably experienced a night or a period of time when we didn't get enough sleep and we just getting to the gym was a drag. And not only do we lack the motivation and desire to be there due to feeling tired and sluggish, but we also lack the energy to match or exceed our usual training quantity and quality in terms of both volume and intensity. And the issue with going into a session sleep deprived and not having this is that in order to make progress, we need to present our bodies and our muscles with an overloading stimulus that will drive the adaptation of muscle growth. But if we're too exhausted and sleep deprived to train hard enough, we won't be able to complete the type of training sessions needed to make progress. And even if we do, so someone's like, I'll go and I'm sleep deprived, but I have like the mental capacity where I really try not to pay attention. When I know I've had a shit night of sleep, I don't look at my aura. I don't let myself become negative. I'm not going to let my psychology, put myself in a negative psychological state where I let it impact that day's, productivity essentially. But even if we are able to go into the gym and still have a pretty productive session, if we don't sleep enough, we won't be able to adequately recover from these sessions. So really, either way, we're kind of out. We're not getting the best results out of the work that we're putting in. And there's been a ton of research done on the effects of sleep and training and exercise performance. And studies on sleep have found that when individuals are underslept, it results in significantly lower reaction times on psychomotor tests, which impacts both our mental and motor capacity. So even our ability to, do the same movements. It could be, complex movements like multi-joint movements, whether it be a squat, a deadlift, things that take a little bit more neurological recruitment, or it could even be just like bicep curls. I'm not saying like that's the most, taxing from a motor capacity, but we see that we're not as efficient at these movement patterns as we generally would be when we're in good sleep conditions. Now, we also have research on how it impacts our training performance in terms of power output and maximal performance. And in a study by Riley, they had resistance trainees sleep normal for 2 weeks and then put them on just 3 nights of restricted sleep. And they tested their performance prior to the sleep restriction on the bench press, the leg press, the deadlift, and the bicep curl. And then after they did the sleep restricted condition, they tested them again. And what they did was after each day, they retested those same movements. And so what they saw was a linear decrease or linear decrement. So the more days they were sleep restricted, the more they saw their performance go down. And one of the biggest impacts sleep loss can have upon our training is actually on our motivation and mood when it comes to training. And so in a study done on weightlifters who were sleep restricted, researchers found that these lifters experienced increased levels of sleepiness, fatigue, tension, and exhaustion. And so when training in a sleep deprived state as compared to when they were entering a session having gotten adequate sleep the night before, they saw that all these markers were increased. And so we have to think that these are going to impact training performances, especially if you're doing this on a frequent and consistent basis. And then in another 2013 randomized control trial, researchers took healthy young exercising adults who reported that they slept between 7 to 9 hours per night on average. And then they split them into 2 groups. One group had their sleep reduced to 6 hours per night for 10 days, while the other group continued with the regular sleep habits. So if they were sleeping 7 hours per night, they kept sleeping 7 hours per night. But if they were in the sleep restricted group, it was knocked back down to 6. And so researchers measured their perceived levels of fatigue, anxiety, and mood disturbances both before and after the 10-day study, and found that perceived levels of fatigue, anxiety, and mood disturbances were all significantly increased in the group that was in the 6-hour sleep restriction group. So just 1 hour sleep loss not only impacts our training performance physically and mentally, but it could also, impact the quality of our training and our ability to improve our body composition as a result.
All right, then. So, how does sleep loss impact one's metabolic health? Now, I do want to ask this. Do you believe this is probably a decent follow-up question? A lot of people are using trackers, like Aura, Whoop, things like that. Do you think that those should be used as guides? How do you use those or recommend using those when monitoring sleep and recovery and like taking that in to consideration?
I think they should be used with a heavy dose of caution. And I say
Okay.
that for specific reasons. So when I have someone track their sleep, sometimes when they have never tracked their sleep, they have no objective analysis of it. And when I ask them, listen, do you get good sleep quality? It's kind of like a toss up. It's almost like they're not analytical enough to really assess things, or they're so used to being in a constantly sleep deprived state that it's almost like the norm. And it's as with anything in life, our body adapts. So if you're used to getting 5 hours of sleep and that's normal to you, you might not even realize that that's insufficient sleep and it is having downstream effects. So when I have someone and they show markers of insulin resistance, they have high elevated fasted blood glucose, they have a high resting heart rate, they have all these signs that their autonomic nervous system is unbalanced or they have high stress levels and they don't sleep enough, I like getting them to utilize a sleep tracker. And what we really see in the research to be the most validated in terms of accuracy, especially in comparison to polysomnography, which would be done in the lab, we see that the Oura is the most accurate. But we
Yeah.
have to take that with a grain of salt because the Oura is great on total length. However, it's not that well validated for REM sleep and non-REM. So, REM sleep and deep sleep. And so really we can't extrapolate that too far. So what I like to utilize it as an awareness tool. Like, listen, you've dialed everything in. You are nailing your nutrition, you're nailing your training, but you're still being impaired recovery wise. And it's not due to the training itself. We are only seeing these patterns crop up when you're saying on your sleep, on the sleep parameter of your check-in that you're having insufficient sleep or you have poor sleep. So let's utilize this tracker to see what a baseline is good for you because although they suggest 7 to 9 hours of sleep for the average individual, we have to realize that everyone's an individual. You know what I mean? So we have to realize that it's going to vary between your life circumstances, your training cycle, what stresses you have within your life day to day. And so what was great sleep for you maybe 6 months ago may not be sufficient now, or maybe, more than enough. And so it really has to be catered to the individual. So I like utilizing this as an awareness tool, but I do highly suggest I do this with my clients. And then also I do this with myself. If you know that you got a shit night of sleep, you wake up, you feel exhausted, don't check your Aura ring. You don't need validation that you got a shitty night of sleep and for it to cause you to become over analytical. And I say that for a specific reason. So there was a study done last year where they looked at the subjective placebo effect of sleep quality. So what they did was they took athletes and they put them in two different sleep conditions. And what they did was it was a crossover trial where they gave them a night of sufficient sleep and a night of insufficient sleep. However, they randomized the order in which they told them what type of sleep they got. So in certain conditions, they got 8.5 hours of sleep, but they were told they got insufficient sleep and they were shown a polysomnography readout, which is the most validated sleep tracking that you can get in the lab. And what they showed was they gave them false data. And so what they showed them was that they only slept 5 hours that night. They got really poor REM sleep and deep sleep. And they basically showed them you had a shit night of sleep, although objectively speaking, they had gotten 8.5 hours, and on the actual polysomnography, they had great sleep quality. Then what they did was they put them through cognitive and physical tests after. Now, in the other condition, they had them in an insufficient sleep condition. And for certain participants, certain of these athletes, they told them that they got a great night of sleep and they showed them this objective data, which they manipulated and made it seem like they got a well night's rest of sleep. So really what we saw in the study was they had a placebo effect. So it wasn't based on the actual sleep duration that they got the night before. It was the information, the data they received from the tracker itself that influenced their performances. So they had these people go through both conditions, and they saw better improvements in most athletes' performance in the insufficient sleep condition when they were shown that they got sufficient sleep than in the sufficient sleep condition where they were falsely told that they had insufficient sleep. So our psychology plays a massive role on our physiology, which is why it's really important to take these things with a grain of salt and realize, be in tune with your body. You can utilize this as an awareness tool. And if you notice that you get overly fixated with certain data, don't rely on it, especially if you wake up, you should know you've been in your body. Say, I've been in my body 30 plus years at this point. So I'm going to know, listen, I didn't get a great night's sleep. I had a lot of sleep interruptions. Let me not look at this data. And I actually do this specifically because I track my sleep over the week and I put it into a Google Sheets document that I utilize. And if I have a poor night of sleep, I don't look at it that night. However, if I get a great night of sleep, I feel great, I do check my Aura score. So lately, I told you this last week, my Aura average was 89%. So I've been checking it. But if I was to get a bad night of sleep tonight, I'm not going to check it tomorrow because it's not going to matter. First of all, I'm not going to compound the effect that poor sleep had on me by letting the data reestablish or reinforce the fact that I got shittier night's sleep than I may have thought I did.
That's a fair point. Thanks for clarifying that out, man. And then I guess the last one we need to talk about is how does sleep impact metabolic health?
Yeah, so this is a big one. I'm actually very interested in this because a lot of times, I track fasted blood glucose with clients, and there is something called the dawn phenomenon where people will have highly elevated fasted blood glucose without insulin resistance. However, we have to realize that sleep plays a massive role in our levels of insulin sensitivity because what ends up happening is when you've had insufficient sleep, it increases cortisol production. And what does cortisol also do? It liberates energy into the system. So when you've gotten an insufficient night of sleep, oftentimes we'll see elevated markers of insulin resistance and mostly within that fasted blood glucose. So often when I have a client that they're showing highly elevated levels of fasted blood glucose, I'll start having them take it postprandially, meaning after meals. And I see that they're right in a very healthy baseline level of postprandial blood glucose. I know it's not an insulin sensitivity issue. It's often due to a stress issue, either the dawn phenomenon that's from high levels of cortisol and adrenaline in the morning, or it's because they had insufficient sleep. And so what we have to realize is that insufficient sleep increases the risk for both insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and obesity, and which suggests that sleep restriction may impair metabolic pathways, especially within muscles. So this is what we see in research. And in a 2012 randomized control trial conducted at the University of Chicago, they took young, healthy men and they entered them into a crossover study to see the impacts that poor sleep would have on insulin sensitivity. and they had each group go through two conditions. In one condition, they got sufficient sleep quality, and they measured all these markers. And then in the other condition, they had them go through 4 days of insufficient sleep where their diets and physical activity were controlled and kept the same in both conditions. So they wanted everything equated in the lab. They gave them the same diets, the same calories, and they had them do the same exercise tests to make sure that everything was controlled. And when they were in the insufficient sleep condition, they found that they had diminished insulin sensitivity and way higher insulin output after meals. So really what that shows is they were more insulin resistant. So their body, the pancreas had to secrete more insulin to dispose of the excess glucose that was coming in. They had higher amounts of free fatty acids in the blood, which most times we would think, all right, they're going to oxidize more fat. But no, what they showed was they had more free fatty acids in the blood, but less free fatty acid use. So their fat metabolism and metabolic flexibility was limited. They had poor glucose use during exercise. They had less growth hormone output throughout the night, and they had higher levels of cortisol and noradrenaline. So all the positive things that we want out of exercise and out of diet, they weren't getting those effects due to being in the insufficient sleep. However, when they had sufficient sleep and were going through the same diet and the same exercise interventions, all those things were reversed. So it really shows the large impact that quality sleep can have on our response to diet and exercise. And then in another study, they looked at recovering from sleep debt, which is something that a lot of people will say. They'll be like, listen, I've had insufficient sleep. I'm going to try to catch up on this. So in this study, they had participants get a baseline of sleep, of quality sleep. So they had them go through their normal amounts of sleep, and then they tested their insulin sensitivity and metrics for free fatty acids in the blood. They then sleep restricted them for 5 nights at 5 hours of sleep per night to mimic a work week where they would be underslept. And then they had them get 10 hours of sleep per night on the weekend. So they kind of caught up on a vast majority of that sleep. What they found is that their insulin sensitivity and blood lipid response got substantially worse after 5 nights of poor sleep. But what they did was after the 2 days of elongated nights of sleep, so those 2 10-hour conditions, they tested them again. Now, what they saw was the free fatty acids improved, but the insulin sensitivity detriments did not improve. And what they saw was it had dropped to about 1/3 due to 5 nights of sleep restriction. So their insulin sensitivity was 30% less than it was at baseline just due to 5 days of poor sleep. So this shows that if you have, you've induced insulin resistance or you've caused, metabolic issues due to sleep, it's not something that you can undo in 2 days. Like, don't get me wrong, it's going to improve it. However, sleep loss impacts metabolic health and insulin sensitivity in a pretty substantial way. So it's something that we have to be cognizant of and realize that you should aim to get as good of sleep quality as possible, as consistently as possible, rather than playing like this catch-up game where I always, I'll get into these conversations with clients. Sometimes they're like, listen, I put it on the back burner these days and I'll make up for it another day. And they think they're going to pay that back. But we actually see in the literature, you cannot pay back sleep debt, and especially from a metabolic perspective.
I think that that's probably the most important takeaway that I try to tell my clients. Like, every night counts. Like, you just got to do the best you can. And you're going to have times where that's a sacrifice of sacrifice. So,
and if we really think about it, so in that condition, they were sleeping 45. So in the one study from the University of Chicago, 5 nights per week, they slept 5 hours. That's 25 hours. But on the weekends, they slept 10 hours. So that's 45 hours. If we do, 45 divided by 7, that's approximately, 6.5 hours. I'd rather someone just get 6.5 or 7 hours per night across the week and just be consistent with that, because we actually see that even when you have a consistent sleep schedule, you get better quality sleep than when you have a regular sleep schedule. So just the fact it's called social jet lag. It's essentially what people go through on the weekends where, they're up, later during the weekends and they go to sleep earlier during the week. We see that just the inconsistency in your circadian rhythm can throw off your sleep quality. So you might be sleeping longer, but you're not getting as good of quality. So it's not just about quantity of sleep. It's also about quality, which is really why I'm a stickler for consistency throughout the week in terms of your routine.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. 100%. Well, dude, where can everybody find you at?
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @BrandonDeCruz_, or on my email is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. Guys, we always appreciate your feedback. It's something that we really look forward to doing this podcast every single week. And also let us know if there are any topics that you guys want us to do a follow-up on. In particular, like if you want us to do a sleep deep dive into like sleep architecture, or even like how to improve your sleep quality, we could follow up with one of those, or anything, related to the topics that we've recently covered that you guys want us to cover more.
Absolutely, man. Sorry, I accidentally touched my mic while I was grabbing my mic. And if you guys want us to do like a business one or interested in stuff like that, me and B would be more than happy to do that as well. I'm found at Jeff Unbreakable Black, Jeff at relentlessforever.com if you want to reach out to me. And B, man, wish me luck. I submit my first draft next
dude.
Monday, man. So it's done.
I'm
296
excited
pages.
for you. Man,
So,
you're way ahead of the game.
yeah, no, it was cool. It was cool to be able to get it done. I just want to attack this project and get moving on to all the other stuff. So,
Yeah, looking forward to hearing about it next week, my man.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Check you next week, B man.